The forest sprawled beneath them, a seemingly endless expanse of deep green broken only by the occasional glint of sunlight off the winding river. From the air, the old cabin was almost invisible, swallowed by the overwhelming presence of the woods. It was a tiny island in a sea of trees, its isolation absolute. The roof was missing shingles in several places, the wood bleached and weathered by decades of sun and rain. A single dirt road snaked its way through the trees to reach the cabin, evidence of civilization in the untamed wilderness. The friend's car bounced along the uneven surface of the road, kicking up dust that hung in the air long after they had passed. As they drew closer, the details of the cabin came into sharper focus. The windows, once bright and welcoming, were now boarded shut, giving the impression of eyes closed in eternal sleep. The porch sagged dangerously to one side, as if weary of bearing the weight of countless forgotten seasons. There was a palpable sense that the cabin had been abandoned for a long time, reclaimed by the forest that surrounded it. The friends piled out of the car, stretching and laughing as they unloaded their gear. They were young, full of life, and eager to escape the pressures of the city for a long weekend. There was Liam, the de facto leader of the group, always ready with a joke and a smile. Next to him was Maria, her eyes sparkling with excitement as she took in their surroundings. Clara, quieter and more introspective, trailed behind, a sense of unease settling over her as she looked at the imposing cabin. And then there was Marco, his ever-present camera already snapping away, determined to capture every moment of their adventure.
Let's get this fire going.
Liam built a roaring fire in the old stone fireplace, its cheerful light pushing back the shadows that seemed to cling to the corners of the cabin. They shared stories, sang songs, and laughed as they cooked their dinner over the open flames. For a little while, the weight of the woods receded, and they were able to forget the isolation of their surroundings. The cabin, bathed in the warm glow of the firelight, felt almost welcoming, a temporary haven from the encroaching darkness. Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The laughter of her friends seemed to fade into the background as she listened to the wind whistling through the trees outside. It sounded like a voice to her, whispering words she couldn't quite make out. She tried to focus on the conversation, to lose herself in the camaraderie, but the feeling persisted. It was as if the forest itself was watching them, its unseen eyes filled with a cold, ancient malice.
Don't you think it's a little creepy?
She finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. Her friends, caught up in their own merriment, didn't seem to hear her.
I mean, this place, it's like something out of a horror movie.
That's the point, Clara. It's supposed to be creepy. That's what makes it fun.
But Clara couldn't help but feel that Liam was wrong. This wasn't the fun kind of creepy. This was something far more sinister. Later that night, after her friends had drifted off to sleep, Clara lay awake, listening to the sounds of the old cabin creaking and groaning around her. The wind howled outside, whipping the branches against the roof like skeletal fingers trying to claw their way inside. Just when she was about to drift off, she heard it, a voice, soft and low, whispering her name. It seemed to come from the woods just beyond the cabin walls, the sound slithering through the cracks and under the door.
Who's there?
She called out, her voice trembling. Only silence answered her. She climbed out of bed and crept towards the door, her bare feet silent on the cold wooden floor. As she reached for the doorknob, the whispering started again, closer this time, insistent. It was definitely her name, and it was filled with a chilling familiarity that sent shivers down her spine. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the events of the previous night fading like a bad dream.
I almost convinced myself that I had imagined the voice, that it was nothing more than the wind playing tricks on my overactive imagination.
But as they gathered for breakfast, a chill ran down her spine. Marco was gone.
Where's Marco?
Liam asked, his brow furrowed in concern. They searched the cabin from top to bottom, but there was no sign of him.
His camera, his pride and joy, lay abandoned on the table. lens cap still firmly in place. This wasn't like him. Marco never went anywhere without his camera.
Panic began to set in as they realized the gravity of the situation. They were miles from civilization, with no way to contact help. And now, one of their own had vanished without a trace. Section 6. The Diary of Elias Croft. Their search for Marco led them to the attic. A dark, dusty space filled with the forgotten belongings of previous occupants.
Amongst the cobwebs and moth-eaten furniture, they discovered a hidden compartment in the wall.
Inside, they found a leather-bound diary, its pages filled with faded ink and disturbing sketches.
It was the diary of Elias Croft, the cabin's original owner.
As they huddled together, reading by the light of a flickering kerosene lamp, a sense of dread washed over them. Croft's entries spoke of strange occurrences, of voices in the night, and shadows that moved with unnatural speed. He wrote of being haunted by something ancient and evil, something that fed on his fear and whispered his deepest secrets back to him in the darkness. The sketches in the diary were even more unsettling, depicting grotesque, shadowy figures with eyes that seemed to follow them around the room. Section 7. Flight. Panic turned to terror as the friends realized that they were not alone in the cabin.
The diary's final entry, scrawled in a shaky hand, ended abruptly with the words, "It knows my name. It knows all our names."
A blood-curdling scream pierced the air.
They whirled around to see a shadowy figure standing in the doorway, its eyes glowing with an eerie light. Without a word, they scrambled to their feet and fled.
They crashed through the undergrowth, branches whipping at their faces, the diary clutched tightly in Liam's hand. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, menacing shadows through the trees. They could hear the sound of their pursuer close behind them, the heavy thud of its footsteps shaking the ground beneath their feet. They didn't dare look back. They knew that if it caught them, they would suffer the same fate as Elias Croft. Section 8. The Clearing. They burst out of the trees and into a small clearing, the cabin nowhere in sight. They had run until they could run no more. The only sound was the beating of their own hearts, loud in their ears. Clara, her eyes wide with terror, pointed to a figure standing at the edge of the trees. It was tall and slender, its form shifting and swirling like smoke in the moonlight. It took a step toward them, and they could feel the coldness emanating from it, a bone-chilling cold that seemed to suck the warmth from the air. There was nowhere left to run. They were trapped. As darkness descended, they huddled together for warmth, their eyes darting nervously around the clearing. The silence was almost as unnerving as the chase had been. Gasping for breath, they collapsed on the soft earth, their bodies trembling with exhaustion and fear. Section 9. A whisper in the dark. Clara closed her eyes, bracing herself for the inevitable. But instead of the agonizing pain she was expecting, she felt a cold hand gently touch her cheek.
She opened her eyes to see the figure standing directly in front of her. Its features, obscured by shadow, were impossible to make out. But its eyes seemed to burn with a cold, knowing light.
And then, it spoke. Its voice was not the guttural growl she was expecting, but a soft, gentle whisper, barely audible above the rustling of the leaves. "He left this for you," it whispered, pressing a small, leather-bound book into her hand.
Clara's eyes widened in recognition. It was Marco's notebook, the one he always carried with him. Before she could speak, the figure vanished, melting back into the shadows as if it had never been there at all. The clearing was silent once more, the only sound the gentle whisper of the wind through the trees. But this time, the wind seemed to be whispering her name.